to PowerTalk. It's good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Can you just tell us who you are and what you do? It'd be great.
Okay, well, who I am is Lawrence Russell, husband, father of two. What I do, I work with young people who have offended. So I'm an operational manager for Lewisham Youth Offending Service. I've been in the Youth Offending Service for 11 years. It was actually you that introduced me to the Youth Offending Service. You remember, yeah? I remember I asked you about opportunities and I started as a volunteer. Okay. I don't know if you remember you done that. So I've been that for 11 years, started as a volunteer, moved up to a case manager, became a senior practitioner, now operational manager for the last 2 years I've been doing that.
So, yeah, I do remember kind of helping you kind of get into the mix, and we were running like a volunteer program when I used to work for the Youth Offending Service in Lewisham. What was your desire? Why did you feel that was something you wanted to get into? What was the kind of...
Prior to being in the Youth Offending Service, I used to run a record shop in Lewisham, ran that for a number of years. Young people just used to come in there all the time during periods where they're supposed to be in school. So I just used to just talk to them, say what's going on there. I just wanted to have a bit of a better understanding of what was going on. So I started doing a bit of youth work. At the same time I was doing youth offending work, but I kind of like geared myself to youth offending work. I felt a bit more, felt more challenging. I wanted the challenge.
Yeah. Okay. And just break down, because obviously youth offending service is something which we hear a lot in the press. What do you do? What is the difference between the youth offending service and, let's say, the youth service or probation? Because when you talk to young people, they always talk about probation, but there is a difference. So what is the youth offending service?
There's a huge difference between youth offending service, youth service, and probation. Now, what people need to remember is that youth offending service is quite in its infancy still. 1998, this came out. So we're talking 21 years since youth offending service has been in place. With youth offending service, we only work with young people who have committed an offence, been charged, and there's 3 strands. So you've got out-of-court disposals, which if a young person has been arrested, admitted the offence, offence has to be quite a minor offence. They can go through what is called out-of-court disposals, which are youth cautions. Police basically tell them off, don't do it again. You've got triage, which is they get a short, small intervention, and then they're signposted to other services, and you get youth conditional cautions, which last for 3 months, lots of interventions, the signposted at the end of that. Then you've got the next strand, which is young people who have actually gone to court and got a conviction now. There's a number of orders that they can get. Orders can range from 3 months community orders to 3 years. We don't usually do 3-year ones. Maximum we may go up to is 2 years. Then you've got the custodial sentences, which year up to life young people can get. With the community orders, lots of work is gone into there. We look at interventions, reparations, victim awareness work. We do, in Lewisham anyway, we've changed our model slightly. Over the last 2 years, we've changed our model to become a trauma-informed service.
What does that mean?
It's a buzzword now.
Well, it's a buzzword, and we hear a lot of jargon: trauma-informed service, public health model. So to say that, like, Lewisham has particularly become trauma-informed in comparison to other youth offending services in London or across the UK, what does that really mean? How does that impact your practice?
It impacts the practice a lot. So it's of the understanding that most young people that we work with in youth offending service, particularly those that reoffend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, they have gone through a series of traumatic events in their childhood. So adverse childhood experiences is what other people call these. When young people have gone through these traumatic experiences, they don't go through a period of recovery. And there may be other traumatic experiences that have gone on top of it. So, for an example, a young person who has witnessed domestic violence between their mum and dad in the household, it could be one incident, but they haven't recovered from it. It was so traumatic for them that it's actually affected their brain development. So that can impact speech and language, how they process information. It can impact, gonna get a bit technical now. In the brain, we've got a part called the limbic system, which is like the emotional part of the brain. All of us kind of operate from that limbic system first. As an adult, you understand a bit more logical, so you can kind of counteract those thoughts with logic. with a young person, particularly a young person who has been through a traumatic experience and hasn't recovered from it, they are really operating in that emotional zone all the time, which can create hypervigilance, hypermasculinity in the men, lots of anger, lots of stress, lots of anxiety. So that type of young person growing up, trying to navigate through their community, getting excluded from school, being fearful because they think every young person's got a knife. If you add in substance misuse into that, what that brain of that young person is not going to operate what a young person in Richmond who hasn't gone through none of that has gone through. So as a youth offending service, we've had to kind of think about what is it that we're doing. I know when I first started youth offending service, it was all about worksheets.
Yeah, because when I was there in 2006, we weren't talking trauma-informed care or public health or anything like that. So it feels like this has been a massive shift in people's practice. And
For me, it's a needed shift. It's understanding that young people, they have attachments, they haven't been nurtured. Well, not young people, all young people that we work with in youth offending service. Attachment issues, distrusting of adults because they've been let down by school, social services, if social services have been involved, youth services. We have to come in and try and build these relationships up with them before we can do any intervention work.
Sure.
Any offending work is not going to work with a young person who, one, doesn't respect you, and one just doesn't like you. It's just not going to work. They're going to come in to sessions, maybe not engage, not talk, not even listen. Yeah. But you've also got to understand that I think it's about 80% of young people that we work with have a speech and language need. Right. Some are very severe, some are minor. So we need to understand that putting a piece of paper in front of them, asking them to read that and doing shit with them, it's not processing in their brain. So we've had to work in very different ways, thinking really creatively about our interventions as well, particularly that we don't have the resources now, the money, to bring in specialists. So we've had to train up our own staff around restorative approaches, trauma-informed, so understanding how the brain works, contextual safeguarding, unconscious bias, various other things we've had to do. And this has all been within the last 2 years in our service.
I mean, that's fascinating that you've used some of those terms, unconscious bias, contextual safeguarding, because that's pretty much the philosophy of Power to Fight, where we're talking that when we're engaging with young people and families, there are bigger issues that we do not normally associate with engagement with young people. And like things like contextual safeguarding is such a massive way that we can engage with young people. And it does feel new, but ultimately this is something which I've seen in people's practice where it's improved their practice and stuff like that. So you're responsible for courts? Or?
No, I was responsible for courts. I'm now responsible for interventions and group work.
Okay, so what does that mean? And to try and break down how many workers you've got, and also how many young people do you kind of see coming in a year?
At the moment in Lewisham, we've had a massive reduction. So I think at the moment we've got around 200 young people coming in. That's less than 1% of the population of Lewisham.
And that's important to say that, because sometimes when we talk about youth violence, we get this sort of like, this epidemic. Every young person's engaging in a way which is negative. But what you've just said there...
It's less than 1%. Okay. Yeah, so can't remember the numbers of young people in Lewisham, but yeah, it's definitely less than 1%. Yeah. Which is, we don't even touch the surface of the amount of young people that come through. Reality is most young people go through life and don't cause any problems for anybody. But we have that less than 1% of young people who do, who we try to work around. So in reference to your question, because we're a trauma-informed service, so I've had to recreate a lot of our previous groups that we used to do. So the group that you made, Double Edge, Knife Crime Awareness Program, we've had to scrap that. Yeah. Because it wasn't trauma-informed. Yeah. So we've created a new weapons awareness program, which I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's being evaluated at the moment, but I'll touch on it a little bit. It is a 12-week program. It has a 4-week engagement phase. So before we do any group work around knife awareness or anything like that, we work with the young people on a one-to-one basis over a 4-week period to build up relationships with them for the facilitators. Because in the past, when you run a group, young people are just thrown onto a group, not really explained what the group is about, they don't know the facilitators, and it just crumbles after a few weeks. Once we build that relationship up with them over a 4-week period, they're brought into the group, and it runs pretty smoothly. They understand exactly what the group's about, hardly any questions, and know what they're going to be taught over the 12 sessions. We've brought in some techniques that were frowned upon initially. So we do breathing techniques with the young people in the groups.
Okay.
So we start, as soon as the session starts, they do breathing technique. When the session ends, they do a breathing technique, and it's a particular certain type of breathing technique. We do mindfulness with the young people in the sessions, and we do positive affirmations. They all get a plant, and they all do positive affirmations towards the plant.
Wow.
Some of the things I was a bit skeptical that young people would take up, but they love it. They love the breathing techniques, and particularly the affirmations to the plants.
Well, it's interesting because, you mentioned double edge, and that's something when I was working at the Youth Offending Service, I developed with another colleague, and that was 2009, 2010. So in the space of almost 10 years, you would expect that there has to be movement and advancement in the techniques that we're doing. So from my perspective, that's great that it's moving that way. One thing I want to pick up on though is, obviously you just said there's maybe 200 kids that you're kind of working with at the moment. You spoke about adverse childhood experiences, and we know that within those, parental abandonment is one thing. Substance misuse, if a parent has been in prison, all these things suggest that child could end up in criminality. And, I totally get that. What I'm seeing and what I'm picking up is also what I'm calling dominant youth culture now. So some young people do not have any obvious ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, yet are getting caught up in this stuff. Recently I had a phone call from a parent whose son who has no kind of, well, let's just put it this way, there's no want or need in his household, and yet picked up for carrying a knife, being excluded from school. So the question is, are you seeing that? Are you seeing kids coming in as well? What are the type of trends you're seeing? Do you agree that actually there is a dominant youth culture, or is it that actually, no, it's still kind of impacting a particular type of young person?
There's definitely a dominant youth culture now. Any child, no matter where they're from, can be the victim of child criminal exploitation. Doesn't matter who they are, or what background they are. The people that are exploiting the children, they're very skilled at identifying what a young person may want or need and picking on those desires, and over time, gradually grooming them to do something that they don't particularly want to do. Also, with the knife possession, carrying knives, and most young people are carrying it out of fear. It's constantly blasted over the news. Every day you're hearing that someone's being stabbed. It's gone from talking about young person being stabbed and murdered to just stabbing now, which wouldn't normally hit the news. So a knife injury now is now hitting the news. So they're hearing that every day. Imagine, as an adult, you're hearing that pastors are being stabbed every day. You would probably want to go and protect yourself somehow. As an adult, you probably have a bit more skills. But we're talking about children here who don't necessarily have the skill to navigate the risk in their community. So the only way they know how to do it, what they think they know how to do, is by carrying a knife and protecting themselves. So that's part of a youth culture that's beginning to come up. You could talk about the music as well.
Is it the music? Is it drill?
No, it's not the music. For me, it's not the music. The music can only have an effect on young people who are vulnerable, who don't have an adult ear in their mind, breaking down the lyrics to them. Don't just let your child sit in front of YouTube watching music videos and you're, as an adult, not understanding what the music is. Sit down and talk to them. Say, what is this? What are they talking about? I understand it. Vulnerable children who are not resilient are going to be influenced by the music. I love hip hop. I love drill. I think one of my first little hip hop from like 9 years old, man, NWA and everything. That didn't influence me because my mum still values in me that I knew not to go that road, but I still enjoyed the music.
And that's interesting because so basically we're touching on what's around the young person, what systems are around the young person to kind of help break down some of the things which are out there. And that is a fair point. What are the trends that you are kind of seeing though? Because, when I was working in youth offending service and the community safety teams, if I'm honest, there was it did feel like there was a particular type of young person coming through, but every now and again, and we won't mention the cases, but I'm sure you'd be familiar. You'd get like a young girl from a really good home getting caught up in a murder, and like I say, this dominant youth culture for me is something which isn't a new thing. I think it can impact anybody, but the type of trends that you're seeing, the type of young person coming through, and the type of criminality as well. Is knife crime the biggest thing? Is that something which you're seeing young people being picked up for?
We pull it into categories. So the most common offence type is violence against the person, which does include carrying knives. But you have assaults, common assault. We get lots of common assaults, particularly young people in care homes. They may be assaulting their key workers because they're put into a place that's not therapeutic for their needs. So a lot of frustration is there. Lots of drug offences. So we get a lot of possession with intent to supply, or just general possession for cannabis. It's quite an array though, and we get a lot of car thefts in Lewisham. There's been a reduction in burglaries. There was a huge trend in burglaries probably about 2 years ago, but that's reduced in Lewisham, amongst our cohort anyway. Assaults, common assault by beating, knives, possession of knives are probably the most common offences that we get.
And these trends, so we don't just focus on Lewisham because we don't want people to think, don't come to Lewisham. It's lovely. But would this be something which you would see across London and also outside of London? Or are we saying that the criminality is different across the UK and across London?
County lines, from my understanding, is affecting most London boroughs, also affecting counties outside of the UK. We can get into the county line talk.
Well, I was going to say, you might just want to break down what county lines is for some people. You hear it a lot, but...
We hear it a lot. County line, young people under the age of 18, groomed and exploited into transporting drugs and selling drugs in Portsmouth, Hastings, Margate, towns outside of London. I particularly don't agree with the term, saying county lines, because we have drug lines within London that young people are selling them, but that's ignored. Right. So we're forgetting about those young people that are selling drugs in London into certain clubs with a certain type of person that they don't really want to...
So I'll say, what maybe is an elephant in the room, that it appears like when we're talking about drugs, we tend to excuse or ignore white middle class drug use, which probably makes up most of the economy.
Probably. But we don't have the facts.
We don't know the facts. But
that's an opinion.
But at least that's an opinion, which we don't know the facts of. Well, probably could get some facts and data, but there does seem to be a difference between, or at least what you visualise when you think drug dealing. You might think black kid in a hoodie on the street corner, not corporate snorting coke off the toilet, possibly. But yeah, okay. So that's interesting. So go on, county lines, and it's something which we hear a lot about, modern slavery acts and all this type of stuff.
It's something that is, I think we just as a society or professionals working in this type of field need to understand a lot more, because it's not even new. It's been going on for a very long time, but it's getting a lot of attention now. Unfortunately, the young people or children that are being groomed to do it are becoming younger and younger. We're getting some 10, 11-year-olds that are going missing for a very, very long time, and they're in these drug houses in terrible conditions. This is what we're forgetting as well. So when people look at the drug lines, I think about the money that young people can potentially make. Some young people can make thousands in a week, but the conditions that they're working on, and they're working 24/7, no breaks. They are threatened if they are with violence, if they don't sell the products. They are kind of exploited into a infinity debt, which I'm going to call it actually, where the people that have actually given them the drugs rob them. They get people to rob them, so they have to work off the debt. And they kind of never ever work off the debt at all. They constantly just keep having to work.
Let me break this down. So, I give you drugs to go and sell, and then I'll set you up to get robbed, and then you have to come back to me and say, I've been robbed, even though I'm the one who set you up.
And I owe you money for the drugs, so I've got to go back out and work for free.
Wow.
And then the value of the drugs generally keeps increasing. So it might have initially been, I don't know, you lost £2,000 worth, but that will just keep changing over time.
Wow.
So yeah, and they're indebted for a very long time.
And where does this grooming begin then? Because
It begins, so generally young people that are probably kind of at the top of the table of being groomed are looked after young people who are in residential care homes. So they don't really have that attachment with their parents. They've been removed from their homes for whatever reason. They're already traumatized as well. The people that are grooming them, they are very, very skilled in identifying these young people. They will go to the PRUs, the pupil referral unit, so schools that have taken children that have been excluded. They work with young people that are on youth offending service, so they know that there already is some kind of scope for them to be willing to disappear from their home or their placement, go away for a couple of weeks and make some money. And it's kind of glamorized as well now with the amount of money that they can make and the potential to make money for a 16-year-old, and you can make, even if it's £500 in a week, that's huge for a 16-year-old, you know. And then someone's got your arm on your shoulder telling you how great you are, and then, yeah.
So a lot of this is to do with modelling and role models, isn't it? Because so much of it, if you haven't got that in the first place, you'll gravitate to anything. And that's heartbreaking, really, but that's what we see on a regular basis. So let's just talk a little bit about how do we disrupt this stuff? Because, you know, you've been in this game as long as I have, and you know that there's so much research, like pretty much everything I touch is like, well, we need to research this, we need to research that. And we know that austerity has caused a massive issue. 1.6 billion has come off the local and central government for the last 5 years. We know there's no youth services. We know there's this poverty gap. We can talk about race disproportionality. We can talk about the school-to-school exclusion, to pupil referral, to prison pipeline. We could talk about the impact on women and girls and violence, all this type of stuff. We know it's out there, and this is what will come up on a regular basis. But in your opinion, what do we need to do to actually disrupt? We know that knife crime is up across the country. We know that this dominant youth culture, even if we can't always measure it, we know there's something which is going on across young people in terms of fear.
But is knife crime up only amongst young people?
Well, please talk to me about
It probably isn't, though. Because if you look at talking about London now, if you look at the murders in London last year, I think it was 133, I think. Majority of them were not young people.
Absolutely.
The victims weren't.
Yeah.
And the perpetrators weren't young people. So why has it become a youth violence issue? It's a violent issue, that's all it is.
Yeah.
You know, humans, we've been violent. Go back to the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Arguments, conflicts, issues have been resolved or tried to be sorted out through the use of violence. Now, I'm not condoning violence, but why has it become a youth issue when it's not particularly a youth issue?
And that's a fair point, because I think the statistics will tell you that actually with those numbers you just quoted, the vast majority of those murders were committed, or the fatalities were people in their 30s. But yet the media will say it's a youth issue.
It's creating moral panic.
Absolutely. So, although what I will say, I mean, I think there's been a 25% rise in young, particularly black kids who have been impacted by knife crime. I think those stats came from MOPAC, from the mayor's office. So I always say, so we could get into is it a black problem, is it not? My thing is always yes or no. It's not when you look at it across the UK, but in areas where it's very hyper-diverse, you can see that, unfortunately, black kids are getting caught up in this stuff. What can we do? What are some of the solutions to this stuff?
Some of the solutions are stop excluding kids from school.
Okay.
That just needs to stop. You exclude a kid from a school, sometimes they go through a period of not being in any placement.
Yeah.
They're just left in limbo for a while. Experiences of sometimes months, sometimes years, where they've been excluded at 13 and haven't really got back into a school by the age of 13, kind of too late then. Then they're placed into pupil referral units, which there are some good pupil referral units, to be honest, but then the majority of them, you're placing all similar type of young people into one building. staff aren't really equipped to deal with some of the types of behaviour, and they're not really learning the type of. It's not a therapeutic provision for them.
But here's the thing, just on that, do we think that's the responsibility of teachers? Because before I was working for Youth Offending Service, I was a mentor. And I know as a mentor, I was able to take some of the pressure off the teachers. Like, okay, I'll deal with behaviour, whether it's one-to-one or group work, and the teachers would teach. Some teachers would argue that the classes are getting bigger. So is it fair to expect teachers to be trauma-informed, to have contextual safeguarding,
Yes.
as well as teaching maths, English, and whatever else?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. If you don't understand what a child may be going through, how are you going to teach them? So a child could come into school knowing that their parents, dad or mum, had a big fight last night, ambulance were called, police were called, and they've come into school completely tired. You're trying to tell me that teachers should ignore that? No. Teachers should take that into account, that this child is probably not in a position now to go through the school's learning day. They're not really going to take in information. So there should be some kind of provision where it's identified that a young person is going through something that they really can't really deal with at the moment. Take them out of that class, put them in something else, whether it just be a counselling session, something where they can purge what they're going through at the moment, instead of them sitting down, they're becoming frustrated and maybe acting out in the class, which will lead them to being excluded. This is pointless, to be honest.
And it's interesting about the exclusion side of stuff. I mean, another person we know, I had Andre on PowerTalk, Andre Harriet, and he was talking about how he sort of that school-to-school exclusion to pupil referral unit to prison pipeline, that somehow needs to be disrupted. So, you know, what you're saying is something which we hear a lot. I just think it's so much more tricky than we realise, especially if we're not prepared to engage with other services which are out there. So we talk about Lewisham, but we know, for example, Ecclesia Church have partnered up with Transforming Lives for Good, and there's an alternative provision there which can allow kids to go there for a little bit of time and then go back into their school system, which I think is amazing, because that's a disruptor, because otherwise that kid gets excluded and goes straight into a pupil referral unit. I think a bigger problem though, and I'd be interested just to get your view on, we hear about public health. Public health model, let's look at violence as a disease, let's look at it holistically, let's bring in different institutions, NHS, schools, faith groups, community, police, all that type of stuff. But the truth is, they based it on Scotland. Scotland had the highest murder rate in 2005, then got cut down to 65%. But one of the biggest things they had was zero exclusions. I think last year, 2018, one person was excluded in the whole of Scotland. Now, that's not happening in London.
And what does that show you, though? It shows you that they've gone from being the highest rate in 2005 of violence to 10 years later, they're not even nowhere near that level, you know, and they've gone through, I know it's mainly in Glasgow that this is happening, but the whole city took on the idea that it can only work if everybody involved said, yeah, we need to go this way. So there's no point youth offending services say we're going to be trauma-informed services where children's social care aren't, or the police aren't. It's just not going to work. People need to be on the same page for it to work. So we talk about public health approach. If hospitals are doing public health approach in regards to violence, and youth offending service are, but the police aren't, and schools aren't, and youth service aren't, and whoever else aren't, it's just not going to work. And people need to remember, it's going to take a very long time. Don't expect to see results in a year. It's going to take lots of money, lots of time, lots of failures as well. It's going to collapse and think, this ain't really working. We need to stick with it and get it through it. Public health approach is about preventing violence from happening. Same way they would treat someone who's got, suspected heart defect. So you want to prevent a heart attack from happening, they'll put things in place before it gets to that stage of a heart attack happening.
Right.
Same thing with violence.
Yeah.
Young people, 8 years old, if there's identified issues that you're aware that they have gone through adverse childhood experiences, start putting things in place at 8 years old. Don't wait until they're 16. 8 years later, that's silly.
So it's about early intervention, it's about prevention. but at the same time, we need exit strategies for those who are in the mix. It's a holistic approach. I think we'll round up. I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to mention or anything
No, there's
else.
loads. We haven't got the time.
We'll have to do a part 2 or something like that. I mean, from my perspective, having known you and just watched kind of your career path, it's incredible to see. I think we need more people like you who understand the community and working your way through. It's brilliant to see. Keep going. I think this has been incredibly helpful, even for me, just to kind of hear just what youth offending services are now doing in 2019. It's brilliant. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And keep going.
I will do.
And,
as long as you keep going.
I will try, man. You know, power to fight. We got to keep going. But it's brilliant that we can continue just to work together. Nice one.
Cool, thank you.